Welcome to the Who's Left podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. So a few months ago, I was honored to host activist, author, and former chair of the state Democratic Party in Ohio, David Pepper, on this podcast. In his 2021 book, Laboratories of Autocracy, and its 2023 sequel, Saving Democracy, one of the Republican dirty tricks he highlights is extreme gerrymandering. In captured red states, GOP legislatures have abused their power to redraw district lines in such a way as to ensure themselves a majority in the statehouse, and that most races will be entirely uncompetitive. Thus begins a vicious cycle of extremism in which legislators face no accountability, have no incentive to compromise, and must be as partisan as possible in order to fend off opponents in the primary, the only time they might really be challenged. Public outcomes suffer, and donors run the show. Since the critical election of 2010, Indiana Republicans have run this same playbook in the Hoosier state, holding a supermajority of more than two-thirds of both houses in the assembly the entire time, currently controlling 70% of House seats and a whopping 80% in the Senate. True to form, Indiana Republicans have taken the state down an extreme path, crusading against LGBTQ Hoosiers, enacting one of the most restrictive abortion bans in the country, and defunding public education to funnel public money to unaccountable private and religious schools. Just some of the most heinous legislation passed in recent sessions. Given the immoderate gerrymandering, Hoosier Democrats do not have a realistic chance of flipping the statehouse this year. But Jennifer McCormick is within striking distance of the governor's office, Destiny Wells is on Todd Rokita's heels, and the party has set the entirely achievable goal of flipping the 4 seats it will take to break the supermajority and hopefully force the Republicans to moderate. And no single House seat is more flippable than my own District 62. Just 2 years ago, Republican Dave Hall defeated friend of the pod Penny Givens by a mere 74 votes, the closest race in the state. In 2024, Hall's Democratic challenger is Thomas Horrocks, a pastor, chaplain in the Army National Guard, and my guest today. This is Horrocks' second appearance on the show. We first spoke in December of last year. That was before the campaign really got underway, and a whole lot has happened since. In this conversation, we'll talk about the economy, culture wars, religious nationalism, public education, the environment, and standing up to big money. Before we turn to the interview, please consider supporting Who's Left with a paid subscription. I currently work as an independent craftsman during the day and work on this project whenever I can. There are so many more things I want to do here at Who's Left. More campaign finance research, more live hangouts, a daily episode if we could get there. But I need your help. If you can, visit scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe, if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So, if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is financially, if that doesn't work for your budget at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. rate, and review the show on whatever platform you use. This trains the algorithm to help new people find us. Follow me on social media at Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft. That's HOOS Left. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I am at ScottRog78, SCOTTROG78, and on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use and send me a DM to discuss ideas for the project. But most importantly, spread the word. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to our little corner of the Indiana left. And I might be the guy with the microphone, but I try to take this thing where your input leads me. So please, be generous with feedback. Good, bad, or meh. I value it all. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you for believing in me. And to everybody, thanks for listening. And here's my interview with Thomas Horrocks. Thomas Horrocks, welcome back to the Who's Left podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you. Has it been a full year yet, or are we not quite there?
Not quite. I believe it was December last year.
Okay. It feels like a lot has happened since then.
Indeed. It has been quite a year. So, at that time when we last talked, the campaign was sort of just getting underway. You hadn't really been out talking to a lot of constituents and doing any canvassing yet, right? The weather was still crappy. It was, the election was almost a year away at that point. But now that you've been out there, I assume there's a lot that folks are talking about.
There is indeed. We've been at doors all over the district, from the most rural parts of Monroe and Brown County to the Bloomington suburbs, and people have lots of feelings and opinions. They're feeling the weight of economic pressures. They're feeling concerns about an increasingly extreme the supermajority and what that might mean for them or their children or their grandchildren. So yeah, and then obviously with the change at the top of the ticket, there's renewed energy and excitement here in the county and the district. So it's an exciting time.
Was that change at the top of the ticket like really palpable? Like there was an energy change? You were out canvassing, talking to people, say, until the end of June or even after that debate. Oh my God, just the mood was like panic, I think, after that first debate. And then when Kamala took over the top of the ticket, you'd say that just changed the energy entirely with people you're talking to?
Yes, entirely. Especially with regards to sort of our more liberal base around Bloomington. I think there was just a lot of disenfranchisement with Biden. There was a lot of malaise. I was talking with people who were saying they weren't even going to vote this year because they were just, so we were strategizing at one point, what do we do to encourage people to get out to at least vote down ticket if they're not going to vote for the top. And since Harris became the nominee, it's just been totally different. We don't feel like we have to do that anymore. And as a matter of fact, we have volunteers coming into the office every day, new people who are looking for signs and looking to get involved. And they'll end up volunteering for, my race or another down ticket race. So it has been a remarkably palpable energy shift in a very exciting and encouraging way.
Well, that's really encouraging. And does that translate out into Brown County and the more rural areas in the district?
I haven't felt it as much out in the more rural areas of the district, although as I drive around, I'm seeing Harris signs in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect in some of the rural areas. And so I think it is translating, but I'm not hearing that as much at the doors. I would say, though, like in the Nashville area, which is a little bit more, liberal, there's definitely some excitement there.
Well, that's good to hear. That's really encouraging. Um, but as we know, stuff at the national level might drive excitement and it gets all the attention, but stuff here down ballot, especially in the state house, that's where the policy that really affects our day-to-day lives is made. You talked about the extremism of the supermajority.
Yeah.
Are people feeling that as you talk to them? Do they realize what's going on there? Because it doesn't get as much attention.
Yes and no. Some people do, right? And they're a little bit easier to mobilize. Others, it's more education. It's more letting them know, hey, here's what the supermajority has done, has been doing, and is planning on doing in the next year. And when we have those conversations, they're sort of like, oh, even among Republicans. And I may have told you the last time we met, but I've had several Republicans throughout the course of this who have said, listen, I'm a Republican, but I recognize that a supermajority that has no accountability, that can make decisions in caucus behind closed doors, isn't good for anybody. As a matter of fact, just within the last 2 weeks, I had an event sponsored by Recenter Indiana, which is a bipartisan coalition made up of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. And their main focus this year is breaking the supermajority because they all realize that extremism and that accountability is deeply out of touch with the values and the needs, not just of Democrats in the state, but really of everybody in the state. And that these policies that have been coming forward in the past, decade or so, are hurting. They're really hurting everybody, economically, socially. The human and economic impact of these policies is hard to ignore, unless you are on the most extreme right.
Yeah. Are folks making that connection then? So they realize that, hey, these guys in Indiana that don't have any accountability, these Republicans do whatever they want. That's translating to folks' bottom line.
We're definitely trying to make that connection for them when we talk to them. And so things I'll say at the door is, hey, I'm running because I think that our state government ought to focus more on everyday regular Hoosiers instead of corporate interests and culture wars. And when I say that, sort of across the board, people are like, well, yeah, I mean, I can get behind that. And then if we have the time, we'll explain, okay, well, here's how this is affecting you. And I'll talk about things like, how the extreme policies are driving our college graduates out of state. And then the economic impact that has in our inability to attract the kinds of businesses that need an educated workforce that can pay better wages for folks. And then, then we can have more revenue in the state and it becomes less burdensome on everybody. And so when I have enough time to make those connections, people sort of see that, they go, oh yeah, I see why that is an important change to make.
Is the kitchen table stuff, economy, housing, wages, healthcare, is that what people want to talk about most when they talk to you?
I'd say 95% of the time, yes. Property taxes has been number one, especially out in the rural areas with like retired folks on fixed incomes who saw the value of their house, sort of explode over the last few years, but they have no intention of moving or selling. So the only effect that has on them is they're paying higher property taxes. And now they have to make sometimes very difficult decisions between, do they stay in their house? Do they buy medicine or food, right? Like real stories that I've heard from people who are trying to make these decisions. Among teachers, obviously, right, we're experiencing some real concern that they're going to lose even more of their ability to collectively bargain in the next budget cycle. We're hearing from folks who have medically complex situations with Medicaid, both on the children end and on the senior end, who are now scrambling because of this $1 billion Medicaid shortfall that came after the last budget cycle. So medically complex children are losing some of the care they had access to from their parents. And then seniors with the new Pathways program are finding themselves having to re-enroll and not understanding the bureaucratic steps they have to go through. And so they're losing care and losing coverage. which is having real economic impact on their ability to just live. So yeah, I would say the economic impact of these policies has been the number one issue, whether it's property tax or Medicaid or utility prices, wages.
So that culture war stuff, which seems to be the Republican focus, and kind of therefore we have to spend all our time answering to it, that doesn't really resonate with people.
It's certainly not their top issue, right? At least when I knock on their door and I say, what are you most concerned about? 95% of the time it's economic. I have had a handful of doors where culture war stuff comes up, with the exception of there are lots of women who are very concerned about Indiana's abortion ban. And the effect that that's having, so their concerns for themselves or their children or their grandchildren, that really does seem to have a lot of folks, men and women actually, in the district, pretty concerned, and that does seem to be a few folks' top issue, especially on the more Democratic side.
Sure, and obviously that's an intensely intimate and personal issue, but it is also a kitchen table economic issue. I mean,
exactly right.
Family planning is incredibly important for your life cycle and your economic prospects and everything, right?
Absolutely. And even on top of that, right? So we talk about the downriver effects of bad policy. 25% of the counties in Indiana are maternal care deserts right now, which means that even women who want to have children, right, have in 25% of our counties have to travel to another county to get maternity care. We're losing OBGYN residents who are telling us they don't want to come to Indiana to practice because they're afraid of what, practicing under these extreme laws and the human cost of that, right? We know that just a year ago, there was a woman who lived in one of these maternal care deserts. She was suffering from an ectopic pregnancy. She had to drive to another county to get care, and she ended up dying because she couldn't get the care she needed in a timely fashion. And so even beyond family planning, right, we're seeing the real human cost of these extreme policies and culture wars that are having real effects on people's everyday lives.
And the maternal care desert, the lack of OBGYNs from, because of the abortion ban, the culture war stuff. But then also that goes in hand in hand. It's like the middle of the Venn diagram between culture war issues and economic issues, because our healthcare policy in the state has, well, even nationally has led to hospital consolidation, and they close the little rural hospitals and they make everybody drive to the bigger cities to receive necessary care, and it's getting you from both sides, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so here's an area where typically Republicans have claimed to have the best interests of rural folks at heart, but these policies are leaving rural Hoosiers behind in terms of healthcare, in terms of broadband, in terms of infrastructure. We just learned that we're about $1 billion short on our needed road funding to just keep our roads up, and that's going to disproportionately affect rural communities as well. So one of the things that I've been talking a lot about is the real human and economic costs of culture wars, right? That in focusing so much on these extreme culture wars, it is leaving us behind economically. It's having real human costs. It's, Michael Hicks had a great article recently about how in the last 20 years, Indiana has fallen 14% in real wages, while the rest of the country has risen about 1%, right? And all of this has happened while we've gone after unions and attacked right to work and undercut the ability of people to collectively bargain. So once again, leaving regular working everyday Hoosiers behind, all because they're so focused on the kinds of culture war things that help them win the primaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is my contention that the culture war issues are there specifically to distract from the crappy economic policy.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite cartoons, political cartoons, and I've showed it in my church and other places. Um, there's this elderly businessman, wearing a suit with a plate full of cookies in front of him. There's this young construction worker with a plate with one cookie in front of him, and then there's what's clearly an immigrant with no cookies in front of him. And this elderly business guy says to the construction worker, "Watch out, fella! That foreigner wants to take your cookie." Right? And I think we could replace the foreigner with, a trans person, an LGBTQ person, anything like that. All of these things are becoming scapegoats and distractions so that they can continue to protect corporate profits, and then the rest of us are sort of left in the dust.
Yeah, exactly. And the tension, I think, is manufactured because in the last, say, 30 years, the LGBTQ community has made tremendous strides in terms of cultural acceptance and gaining human rights and whatnot, right? And a lot of other folks have been left behind economically. So they see themselves falling behind, and this other group who they already have a predilection to dislike for whatever reason, they see them moving ahead relative to where they were anyway. And I could see how they could think, we're getting shafted while this other group's being.
Correct. And it's a tale as old as time, right? This spinning up identity politics in a divisive way to prevent class solidarity. Well, I mean, we saw that immediately coming out of the Civil War, right? Where there was the fear that, poor freed slaves, poor blacks, and poor whites were going to unite in a class solidarity and realize that they were all sort of under the thumb. And so what did they do? They manufactured this idea of, white supremacy to separate the poor whites from the poor blacks and scapegoat then the blacks with racism to prevent class solidarity. It happened, and it's happened all the way since. And the groups change, right? Perhaps it's people of color, perhaps it's immigrants, perhaps it's LGBTQ folks. But some vulnerable group becomes the scapegoat then to prevent all of us who are experiencing economic pressure from uniting together and say we deserve better. And so I think that's just where we have to recognize the game that's being played. We have to reject it out of hand and understand that really it's not, immigrants versus natives. It's not LGBTQ folks versus straight people. Really, we have a rich and powerful few who are trying to stir all of us up so they can become a little bit more rich and a little bit more powerful.
Yeah, as if they need it, right?
Right.
You mentioned, you were talking about your little comic there, which I've seen that one. It's brilliant. And you mentioned you've showed it in your church. Folks didn't catch our last episode together. You are a pastor.
I am.
A lot of these culture war issues are framed in a Christian way, right? We've got this big Christian nationalism push. Project 2025 is an inherently Christian nationalist document. We've got lieutenant governor candidate in this state who is openly an avowed Christian nationalist and talks about it a lot. You're a pastor. Yep. You do not share these values. How does this whole thing make you feel?
Some mixture of both disgusted and enraged. Disgusted because it is such a perversion of what I understand the gospel and the message of Jesus and the role of Christianity to be. I just, when I read scripture, I absolutely do not come away with this idea that we ought to be trying to conquer the nation through force and imposing, Christianity as the primary religion on people. That's not the way that Jesus went about doing it. As a matter of fact, in my reading of it, that was a path that he specifically rejected when some of his followers had hoped that he would do that. He said, "This isn't the way that we do it." He talked about a message of, the first shall be last, and we lead through service and love and self-sacrifice, not through power and dominion, right? So I feel like Christian nationalism is a clear violation of Jesus's own message and mission. And I say enraged because they're taking something that is deeply personal, meaningful to me, and beautiful to me, and I feel like they're corrupting it, and in a way that I reject, but I also don't want to let them have it, right? I don't want to say, I don't want to give them the satisfaction of getting to claim Christianity or Jesus, especially for something that I find so offensive. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this. And I wanted folks, other Christians who didn't share those views to see somebody else prominently who also doesn't share those views, so they don't feel alone. But also people from the outside looking in to say, okay, at least there are some expressions of Christianity that are not this vile, dominating thing that I'm seeing in these other places. So that if somebody is potentially exploring or whatever, they can say, okay, like at least that's not the case for everybody, and there are other expressions that I might find more palatable or more acceptable.
Is this something that you get into while you're canvassing and people are talking to? I'm sure you get probably some of the Christian nationalist talking points come back at you. I've got to assume you're in a position where you can shoot that down better than most folks.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, I get more of it from folks on the liberal side who are concerned about it. So they see pastor and they're like, whoa. And so, which I totally understand, right? I absolutely 100% get somebody who is going to see that and say, hold on a second, you're not like that, right? And then it gives me an opportunity to say, no, I'm not. And here's why I'm doing this. But yeah, folks on the other side, when some of those issues come up, it does provide an opportunity. And because I've talked about it quite a bit, I've had a few chances to sit down and have some conversations with folks. But a lot of times at the doors, they don't have enough time to sit down and get into a nuanced discussion of the differences. And I just try to frame it as, this is my ability. I've been trying to serve people and help meet their needs as a chaplain and as a pastor. And I'm trying to bring that now to the next level. And I'll talk about how in my work as a pastor and as a chaplain, I came to the realization that charity will never be sufficient to fix what bad policy creates. And so I'll talk about a quote from Desmond Tutu, who said, pulling people out of the river is great, but eventually we have to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. And so I'm running for office to sort of do that, to go upstream and find out where people are falling in so that we can prevent that and give everybody a greater opportunity, sort of lift everybody up instead of just change the odds for a few folks through charity.
That's a brilliant quote from Desmond Tutu. I had not heard that one.
Yeah, isn't it great?
It really is. It speaks to systems, right? Yes. Systemic problems, and how fixing the big thing upstream can prevent people from falling in. Because yeah, it is. It's inefficient to do it that way, right?
Right. Yeah, another analogy I use is it's often a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And one of the examples I use is, our church sponsors a food pantry, and every week we are helping hundreds of people get a little food for the week. But that is not going to solve food insecurity, right? If they're not able to get jobs that pay living wages enough for them to afford the rising cost of housing and the rising cost of groceries, right? What we're doing is good. It's necessary. It's a Band-Aid, and Band-Aids are helpful, but Band-Aids are not a cure. And so we have to be able to go upstream and find out, why are people hungry? Why aren't they able to get jobs? Why are things so expensive? And that is when I talk about the difference between charity and justice. Those are the kinds of things that I try to educate my own folks about in church. There's charity, and we're always going to need charity, right? That we're never going to totally eliminate that, but it's also never going to fix injustice, right? Injustice is fixed through fixing systems and structures and policies. And that should hopefully reduce the need for charity, but it will never eliminate it. And then we can have charity to catch the folks that are still falling in for whatever reason. But we need higher level, systemic level, structural level, policy level changes to make that better for everybody.
I was talking to Cindy Worth recently over in Congressional District 6 here in Indiana, and her opponent is Jefferson Shreve, who is like independently extremely wealthy. He's worth probably like $600 million. And one of the things I've written about him previously is, he claims to be this great philanthropist, right? He's all about charity. But relying on that charity, especially that like billionaire philanthropy, right? Yet you have to go through all of the exploitation and the poor systems to get these folks that rich in the first place to then rely on their philanthropy.
Right. And one of the things that I think that we don't often talk about in those spaces is the temptation in those spaces to develop a savior complex, right? I think sometimes there becomes a resistance to fixing things at a higher level because then, well, what will my charity do, if we fix these problems at a higher level? And so I think that...
How can I take credit for fixing the problem that I myself caused?
Right. And again, I'm not knocking charity because there's always going to be a need for it and folks benefit from it. But it has to be, secondary to addressing the reasons why people are falling in the river. I think that illustration captures it so clearly.
And you're especially talking about members of a congregation, people who are probably, just holding on themselves, helping people who aren't holding on, right? We're not talking about billionaires here. We're talking about, just community and regular people helping each other. That's not philanthropy so much as mutual aid, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. And I am grateful every time, I'm grateful for billionaire philanthropy, but also I want to work towards a world where it is less necessary because we've addressed the systems that make it necessary.
It's like, oh, you guys want to help? Thanks. How about you pay your taxes?
Right. Yeah.
Well, okay. So speaking of things financed by taxes, public education has been one of the big topics here in Indiana as well. And I was watching this debate with Mike Braun and Jennifer McCormick last night, and that was one of the big things they argued about. And she hit Braun over vouchers, right? Vouchers are, in essence, defunding public schools. Do I read that correctly?
In a sense, yeah. So the way that it works currently is the vouchers come off the top of the education budget, right? And so the Indiana Coalition of Public Education has some really great resources for this. What they sort of refer to it as a leaky bucket. So the state general fund pours money into education in general, but right off the top comes like the vouchers, the choice scholarships, the charter schools, and all of that, and then traditional public schools sort of get what's left over at the end. And what has happened over the past several cycles is we have expanded this voucher program. So what was initially touted as this way to rescue poor kids from failing schools and give them a choice to succeed somewhere else has become really just subsidizing the rich who have already been sending their kids to public school, and now we're just paying for it. And the school districts are sort of bearing the brunt of that cost. And so Dr. Phil Downs, who is a former superintendent up in the Allen County area, and ICPE have these tools where you can go and you can look by county at how much each school district share of the voucher program they show. And so to give you a clear example, District 62 includes all of Brown County. Now, Brown County has 0 private schools. However, their share of the voucher program in the 2023-2024 school year was $761,000, right? So that is money that they would have received had we not expanded the voucher program to include, families who are making so much money. So local school districts are actually losing money they would receive from the budget as we subsidize children going to private schools in other counties, Allen County and Marion County. And the kids that we're subsidizing, more and more we're realizing, are not kids who were once in failing public schools, but these are kids who have always been going to private school. Their parents have been paying for it, and now we're just subsidizing it. And on top of that, these are schools that have 0 accountability. They don't need to account to the state for outcomes. They don't need to account to the state for how they spend the money. And they're allowed to discriminate based on whatever they want because they're private schools, religious schools. So yes, we are subsidizing wealthy families sending their kids to private schools that are allowed to discriminate at the cost to local public school systems.
Right, and those local school systems are like mandated by law to have to cover a lot of things that these private and charter schools don't have to do. Like the private charter schools don't have to take every special needs kid in the county or in their school district and care for them, right? And those kids are disproportionately expensive to care for, which is great. That's fine. We should do this. This is a community obligation, but
right.
Those private and charter schools don't have that same thing. Same thing with like transportation and busing. Like that's a huge chunk of a lot of school budgets is just transportation.
Exactly. And then on top of that, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, so forgive if it's a little inaccurate here, but I believe it was three different charter schools in the last couple of years that have now come under indictment for fraud, right? So they're taking this money, and if I remember correctly, they were fraudulently inflating their numbers so they would get more money, and they didn't actually have the number of students that they claimed that they had. And again, so this is money that could have been in traditional public schools that folks have figured out that they can, just claim that they have the school. And there's very few requirements. There's very little accountability that the people who are getting this public money have to be accountable for. They don't have to answer for it. And in some cases, it ends up being actual criminal fraud.
I tell you, I'm a pretty peaceful guy. I'm not vengeful. I believe in restorative justice, right? But those folks, allegedly, are ripping off children.
Right.
Yeah, I want to throw more than the book at them.
Right. Yeah. Yes. They're ripping off our children. And, then at the same time, they want to complain about, the cost of things like welfare and food stamps and all this stuff, when we know that every dollar invested in early childhood education, in the education in general, is going to pay off in the long run in terms of well-educated citizens who get jobs and pay taxes, right? So if you want to stop, like if you want to address some of these problems, we know that investing in education is going to do that. So it's sort of you defund the programs that are going to prevent the kinds of problems that you're complaining about. It's a mess all around.
The schools, and even the welfare and the public assistance and all that stuff. And I feel like Republicans, all too often, they only look at it as a cost, like a sunk cost, and not as an investment in your people.
That's correct.
Like, if your people are educated, They're going to be more productive in the future. They're going to be more innovative. If people are eating and have a roof over their head, they're going to be more productive citizens.
Right. That's exactly right. And all of that is borne out by the data. So it's getting that message out and helping people understand that that's the reality, and then pulling back the curtain, right, with the stuff we talked about earlier. And here's why these culture war things are really just a distraction from these other things. When it comes to these vouchers, there were folks who were telling us at the very beginning that they knew that vouchers wasn't actually about rescuing, more kids from failing schools. It has always been a Trojan horse to privatize education for culture war issues. So I think just pulling back the curtain, educating people, letting them know is a big part of the process.
Yeah, and where vouchers came from originally, right? Like where they were invented, they came directly out of the response to Brown versus Board of Education.
Right.
These were invented like in Virginia, in the South, to find a workaround, because the federal government said, no, you need to integrate your schools, and the white supremacists in the South were like, all right, how are we going to take public money and use it to send our white kids to school by themselves? and that is the lineage of vouchers.
Yep.
And they may have shined them up really good, but they kind of still do the same thing.
Yes. Yeah, and that's exactly right. Most of the folks who are getting these now are wealthy white folks who were already going to private schools to begin with.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
So I was looking at your website a little bit before we hopped on here, looking at your campaign issues, and when we've talked about quality of life, right? That's the big thing people talk about at your door, and that includes the economy, housing, wages, and healthcare, and it includes schools.
Right.
And how this culture war stuff is essentially used to distract from the Republicans decreasing our quality of life, right? And so we've talked about those three, but you also talk a lot about the environment on your website, and again, quality of life, right? Quality of our environment, our living area. So what is the biggest component of the environmental issue that you see as a problem that we need to address in Indianapolis?
I mean, it's so interconnected. But just by way of example, we know that Indiana has the most polluted waterways in the country. Most of our lakes and streams are not safe for fishing, for swimming. They're not. We have some folks who are relying on the fish in there for sustenance, right? And so I think we have to address the issues of runoff into our lakes and streams, some of which is agricultural, some of which is human from failing septics, some of which is our utility companies, which are still, relying very heavily on fossil fuels instead of transitioning to cleaner, more sustainable energies. And so I think it's sort of a holistic. I think what I would like to see is, some sort of environmental task force that evaluates the environmental aspect of perhaps any piece of legislation, right? We know that there's fiscal notes. Every piece of legislation has a fiscal note. Here's what it will cost financially to implement this. I think it would be neat if we incorporated some sort of like environmental or climate note to this. Here will be the environmental impact of such and such policy. And who will be affected by that. And then in whatever ways we incentivize folks. Now, we got to be careful with that, right? Because sometimes we can go the wrong direction with environmental stuff, and then folks who are already low wage, low income end up bearing a greater cost. So there's got to be ways that we can help those folks while holding, the people who do have the resources, some of these major corporations who are contributing to so much of the pollution, accountable for cleanup. And I'll give a negative example that happened in the last legislative session, which was one of our major energy companies. The Supreme Court ruled that they were not allowed to pass on the cost of their cleanup to ratepayers. The Supreme Court regarded that as retroactive rate making, right? And said you can't do that.
Yeah.
So our state legislature then, and my opponent, who sits on the utilities committee as vice chair, they rushed through an amendment to a bill overriding the Supreme Court, saying actually they can pass on the cost of their cleanup to ratepayers, right? So it's really, really interconnected. Right.
Just makes you want to strangle them. Yeah.
Although we repudiate violence, we don't actually want to strangle them. We just want to vote them out.
Well, we can want to strangle them. We just don't actually do it. That's so gross. And you say, well, you're talking about who's contributing to the environmental problem, right? And,
right.
And it is those big corporations, your Dukes and your Centerpoints and your NIPSCOs and whoever else. I'm sure there's other energy utilities in the state, but those are the ones I know. In addition to contributing to the environmental problems, they're also contributing to the Republican legislators, right? Who are covering up their environmental problems.
That's exactly right.
And that's especially gross. You mentioned your opponent. That is the incumbent Dave Hall. He won his race 2 years ago by a couple hundred votes.
Less than that.
Less than that.
It was 37, and they went to a recount, and the total ended up being 73. So it was 73 votes at the end.
73 votes. So
73 votes.
This was the closest race in the state 2 years ago, right?
That's correct. And it is targeted as the closest race this year as well.
Say understandably. Yeah.
Yep.
So I see maybe at first he wasn't taking this race as seriously, but I'm seeing a whole lot of Dave Hall the last month or so. He's bringing in the big signs, bringing in the SUV. Got a lot of stuff going up all over the place. He's got the bottomless pockets of the Republican supermajority behind him. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. So we just need people to turn out, which has been our goal. So one of the most recent models I've seen has this district is actually D+3. One of the things that we know from the 2022 race was turnout in some of our strongest areas was abysmally low. So we overcome that by getting out and knocking on as many doors as we possibly can, by raising as much money as we possibly can so that we can get our own message out there. And folks will be pleased to know we've already had 3 mailers go out and hit the mailboxes. We've got one commercial on TV right now in cable and digital spaces. And if folks want to help us with that, right, to help us stay on the air and keep these things coming out, contributing financially, I don't think we'll ever be able to completely compete with the Republican unlimited cash machine. But folks who have contributed to us have allowed us to get some of these things out into people's mailboxes, especially in such a geographically sprawled district. And then it's just the good old fashioned, hard work. So helping us get out, knock doors and write postcards, do phone banking. And I'm feeling pretty encouraged with that. And so if any of your folks or, viewers and listeners want to get involved, if you're in the area, go to our website and sign up to knock doors with us. It's really a lot of fun if you've never done it. It's actually one of my favorite parts of campaigning is talking to people at their doors. It's not as scary as it sounds at all. If you're not comfortable with that, we've got phone banking options or postcard writing options where you can connect with voters that way. And we'll provide training for all of these. And if you don't have the access to that, or you don't live in the area, but you have a little extra finance and you want to chip in to help us get some more mail out and help us stay on the air and print some bigger signs to get some name rec, we'll certainly put those contributions to good use.
Yeah, and that's really important because there's lots of parts in this state, and Democrats in Indiana have been doing a lot better about contesting every race, but there are still plenty of places in this state where there isn't a Democrat on the ballot. Maybe you're in one of those places where you don't have anybody to help directly. Well, someone like Thomas or Matt McNally in Carmel, or Josh Lowry up in Westfield, or lots of these other folks I've talked to over the course of this election cycle that are in flippable races.
That's right.
They need your help because breaking the supermajority helps the whole state.
That's exactly right. And what I hope your viewers have already gathered from your other conversations is that is within reach this cycle. We have enough competitive races that if we get enough support to get our message out, it is, and with the momentum at the top of the ticket and people's dissatisfaction with the status quo, it is within reach to break the supermajority in this cycle. And what I've been saying as I go around is that's not the end, that's just the beginning, right? Because if we can flip these seats this cycle and break supermajority, do some good work, and then in 2026, if we can protect and flip a few more, in 2028, protect and flip a few more, we get to 2030, right? And perhaps we have a say in drawing some fairer lines so that the real political makeup of Indiana could be reflected in our legislature. We know, based on polling, that 42% of Hoosiers identify as Democrats. That is not reflected in the statehouse, right? So this is the result of gerrymandering, and it's also the result of the fact that we are 50th in the nation for voter engagement and voter turnout. This is the other thing too. We will win a lot more races if we just get out and vote, but I think too many folks have gotten complacent or they've bought the lie that their vote doesn't matter because we're hopelessly Republican, but we're not. And if folks actually get out and vote, right, we will see some major turnaround. And if we can sustain that for a few cycles, we do have a real shot in redrawing some fairer lines. And I don't think that that's just a pipe dream, because it's happened in places like Michigan and Wisconsin, right? Long-term strategy has paid off. So folks who, as you said, in other parts of the state, who will invest in this race now so that over the next few cycles, we can invest in expanding. We got to do a better job thinking long term and strategizing, and recognizing that our involvement really does matter, right? If we're 50th in voter turnout and we're very red, it just means that the ones who aren't showing up, right, are us.
It's a vicious cycle, right? You get, Republicans put the voter ID in place, I want to say like 2008, 2009. And immediately the next election cycle had an effect on voter turnout. They win 2010, they draw the districts, they gerrymandered the districts, so it's harder to vote your way into power anyway. So, okay, well, now you're gerrymandered. It's like, well, what the hell's the point? We can't vote our way out of this. So it's a self-reinforcing system. I think that if Democrats can win the presidency and both houses of Congress this year, it's a big lift, but if they can, they get For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act through, those things will help places like Indiana, where maybe we're a little further behind Michigan or Wisconsin in terms of, making things fair. We can get a little help from the feds. Then we're looking at outlawing gerrymandering. So come 2030, we'll have fair districts. And then we can see our values reflected in our state legislature.
Right. That's correct. And I think part of this messaging too needs to be that even for Republicans, the supermajority is out of touch and extreme, even for most Indiana Republicans. And we know this when it comes to things like the abortion ban, when it comes to things like the legalization of cannabis, when it comes to things like public education and vouchers. And I've been telling Republicans, listen, if you vote for me this cycle, it doesn't make you a Democrat for life, right? You can still be a Republican, but you can recognize that the supermajority is bad for you too, right? That it's affecting your bottom line as well. And later on, when things are a little bit more balanced, you can go back to being a Republican if you want to go back to being a Republican, right? But for now, we all sort of have to band together to create a government that's working for all of us, instead of that's so out of touch with our needs and our values.
And I'll tell you again, I'm a lefty. I'm a lefty. But this ticket in Indiana this year, you got Jennifer McCormick, a former Republican. You've got Terry Gooden for lieutenant and governor. He's a real good old boy. I talked to him. Nicest guy I ever want to be.
Yeah.
And then Thomas, you are a pastor. How are they? They can't out Christian you.
That's right.
So I think Republicans from, moderate to even conservative, but not out there, I don't think there's any reason you can't safely vote Democratic for those races in this cycle.
Right. Yeah. And there's, even if I was the most extreme left, sort of candidate, and I'm not, but even if I was, the idea that simply me winning would make the legislature extreme, there's just no chance of that, right? We're just trying to bring some balance back right now. We're just trying to bring some accountability back. We're just trying to make things a little bit more fair, because that's all that we have the chance to do. There's no chance that this cycle we are going to all of a sudden be in the majority, let alone a supermajority. We just think there ought to be, some more accountability and some more balance. So you're absolutely right. It's not like voting for any of us on this ticket is going to turn Indiana into some, left-wing socialist,
California,
utopia. Exactly, right? There's simply no chance of that. But we do have a chance to bring back some balance and to work for a government that works for the actual people instead of just being distracted by culture wars and protecting corporate profits.
Yeah, very good. So, Tom, we're coming up on the end here. We've only got a couple minutes left. So in that time, I want to give you an opportunity to give people your sort of closing pitch, and then tell folks where they can help you out. I know you've already said, we need some phone banking and postcard writing and canvassing help. Give them the website too.
Yeah. So Horrocks for Hoosiers.com. That's HORROCKS FOR Hoosiers.com. You can donate there. You can sign up to host a yard sign or canvas or phone bank. And then on top of that, my encouragement is just get out and vote. 50th in the nation for voter engagement. You have an opportunity right here in District 62, in many other districts across the state. If we turn out, I think I know this is true for District 62. If we turn out, we're going to win here. I believe that's true, for McNally and for Lowry. I even believe that's true for Destiny Wells and Jennifer McCormick this cycle. The numbers are looking like we could do this. So this is not the year to protest by not showing up. This is the year to get out and vote for the best option that you have on the ticket to bring some balance back to the state house. And if we work together, we've got a chance to bring the focus back to the people who need it the most.
Excellent. Well, Thomas, I appreciate you doing the good work out there and doing your best to bring real Hoosier values to Indianapolis. And I want to thank you again for being here with me today.
Well, thank you for all that you do to help get the message out and for taking the time this morning.
All right, everybody. Thomas Horrocks, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Thomas Horrocks, Democratic candidate for State House of Representatives, District 62, which includes all of Brown and parts of Monroe and Jackson counties in south-central Indiana. So over the last few months, I've spoken with several scholars of religion: Andrew Whitehead, Matthew Taylor, Karen Park, and now this is my second interview with Pastor Thomas. So let's see if this heathen here has learned anything, and begin my closing thoughts by turning to Scripture. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Now, let's bring in a little math and apply the transitive property. If, according to Timothy 3:16, Jesus is God in human flesh, then you cannot serve both Jesus and money. Let's go a step further. In Matthew 25, Jesus says, "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." Again, by the transitive property, then you cannot serve both the least among us and money. And I'll be damned if that isn't basically the same thing you'll find in the Gospel of Pepper, Book 1, Chapter 5. Quote, "Serving private interests earns you far greater rewards than the public interest. And, as a politician in a rigged district, the biggest risk you face is being outflanked by an extremist in your next primary. So your incentive is to be as extreme as possible. Even if public outcomes plummet, so long as you are extreme and cater to those private interests, you and your colleagues are reelected. No sweat. And the one thing that will get you ousted from office? Working with the other party on anything. So never do that." End quote. Horrocks said 95% of his interactions with voters concerned the economy. Dave Hall and the Republican supermajority make sure Indiana's economy works for their donors, not for the least of these among us. Tom brought up the quote by Desmond Tutu about challenging systems. Dave Hall and the Republican supermajority ensure that downstream problems go unsolved if a donor profits upstream. Who among us are more vulnerable than children? Dave Hall and the Republican supermajority drain the funds earmarked for those children's public schools and funnel them to their donors in the for-profit education industry and ideologues in the religious indoctrination industry. Indiana's waterways are the dirtiest in the nation, and our air quality is almost as bad. Dave Hall and the Republican supermajority let our monopoly energy companies pollute with impunity and run an end around on the very conservative state Supreme Court to force consumers to pay for the cleanup. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both ordinary Hoosiers and moneyed interests. Dave Hall and the Republican supermajority serve their wealthy benefactors. Thomas Horrocks will serve us. Thank you for listening. Find out more about Tom's campaign at Horrocks for Hoosiers. That's HORROCKS, for spelled out FOR, Hoosiers.com. Volunteer, donate, help however you can. Links are in the show notes. And if you are listening to this on the day of publication, today is the last day to register to vote in Indiana. So pause, do so right now if you haven't, and double check your registration even if you have. Make sure your family and friends have also taken these steps. Then, early voting opens tomorrow. Use it. Vote as early as possible and dedicate the rest of the time before Election Day making sure others vote. Tell everyone you know. Finally, if you're feeling extra generous after you've contributed to the Horrocks campaign, head on over to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and help support this project with a paid subscription. That's where you'll find everything I publish, but you can also find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other social media sites at ScottRogers78. My DMs are open for feedback, tips, ideas, and concerns. You can also email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a more democratic Indiana. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.